Today on Thinklete, we're diving into athlete mental health, including how it uniquely impacts neurodivergent athletes. I'm joined by Emma Lapierre, a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in athlete mental health. Emma works directly with athletes navigating pressure, perfectionism, anxiety, identity challenges, injury, and burnout. And she sees firsthand how these challenges can show up differently depending on how an athlete's brain processes stress and performance. Because here's the reality. You can train speed, you can train strength, but if an athlete's self-worth rises and falls with their last performance, especially if they already process emotion or feedback differently, they're competing on unstable ground. This is a conversation about perfectionism, pressure, resilience, and what sustainable mental strength looks like for all athletes, including those who think, feel, and process differently. Emma, welcome to Thinklete.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This is going to be great. Let's start off. If you could give our listeners a little bit more background on yourself.
Yeah. My name's Emma. I am a accredited social worker working in Melbourne, Australia, where I have my own private practice working with young athletes. My background in social work kind of sits in the mental health and sport-related realm. Originally, coming from Canada, moving over to Australia a few years ago, kind of really focusing in on the athlete kind of support that I was hoping that I kind of had when I was younger. So I use both lived and learned experience to support young athletes and their families.
Well, welcome. I'm curious on the lived experience. So you have an athletic background as well, correct?
Yes, I do. So I, in a very Canadian fashion, grew up figure skating competitively. So I spent the majority of my years inside of an arena, really enjoying it. Training was something that I really enjoyed. Looking back, I think as like a neurodivergent person, I think actually the routine and structure was really helpful for me, and something that actually probably really helped manage some of my my challenges. So doing that, ended up injuring myself around like 18 and kind of retiring from the sport. And with an injury kind of brought me into strength training. So after doing that for several years, when I made the move over to Australia, I was like, I want to learn how to do Olympic weightlifting. And
Wow.
found myself kind of like competing as an athlete again and realizing how much I really, really missed that kind of that life and that competitiveness in me and like the enjoyment of just training and like being in sport. And yeah, I haven't kind of looked back. I think it's really kind of helped me transition into this space of like, what I really want to be doing is like working with young athletes.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife and I we're on the high rocks training journey
Oh
right now.
yeah.
So that's kind of giving us a little bit more of that structure again, and that competition. The races are coming up here in the States next
Oh
month
yeah.
in Florida. But no, I hear you on that. So I'd be very curious now in your not only your lived experience, but now in practicing, what are you seeing right now in athletes that generally concern you the most when it comes to some of the mental struggles that they are having?
I think, probably a really good example is if we kind of reflect on, the Winter Olympics that just finished up and, some of the biggest conversations were around athletes, under so much pressure. Either, there's like self-pressure, there's, being perfect, but then also there can be pressure that they experience as they grow up through the highly competitive streams. And we look at, if I, focus on the figure skating aspect of things at the Olympics, there was such a big space where people were talking about like burnout and pressure in the sport and how the woman, Alyssa Liu, who won the gold medal this year, was so vocal about how important it was for her to have fun in training and competing and how she actually is enjoying herself in what she's doing. And so I think that is probably one of the biggest points that I'm noticing at the moment is young people, specializing in a sport really young, focusing in on that and then kind of and leading to burnout before, they are even coming into adulthood and, losing enjoyment and joy like in the sport and just in sport in general, because we don't need to be doing one specific sport to enjoy all of the positive aspects that might come from it, right?
For sure, for sure. And I would actually, I haven't, I would be love to get your opinion on this. So with our son, our 9-year-old son, I've said that exact same thing. And if I talk to younger kids that I'm coaching, or I'm ever asked what I would say the same thing. Play as many sports and as many positions as you can. And then, as you get older and, it gets closer to college and you have, if you're a serious athlete and you're going to play at the next level, I'm sure eventually you're going to have to pick. But what's interesting in our situation, in my family situation, is that with our neurodivergent son specifically, our 9-year-old, we have tried many different sports, whether there be individual sports, team sports. We tried other activities, obviously away from sports that he's interested in. But what we have found is there's a certain environment, a certain type of sport where his neurodivergent skill sets become maybe viewed as more normal, more regular. He fits in better. Socially, he does better. Confidence grows. And for us, I think of it's the faster paced sports, right? My background is in baseball. I don't know, Australia, what would that be? Cricket in Australia, I believe. Kind of similar.
I think they still, actually, now I'm questioning myself. Definitely cricket's one of the biggest ones here, but I still think there's baseball that happens here and there, maybe just not as common. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, but more of, my background is more of the sport where you're standing still, you're waiting, and then you're reacting. But what we have found is, again, it's the sports that are more of that constant pace, right? The back and forth, the movement, the running. Those are the ones that he seems to do better with. And all that to say, even taking it a step back, he has gravitated towards American football. And we could sit here and say the same thing. Well, I'd love to have him play basketball or play soccer. It's movement. But at the same time, when we say, hey, buddy, do you want to sign up for this sport? He pushes back and he's like, no, I don't want to play that. I just want to play football. Now, where I live, you can play that sport and, you can play football in some sort of way all year round, whether it's flag football, obviously tackle football. You can have, they do other practices and camps and things like that. So it's possible that, but again, I am always like, all right, are we going to eventually approach burnout with him? Or is it, we just kind of keep saying, hey, let's keep doing this because I know how great it makes him feel. And I know that how the positive environment that it's creating. So I guess what are your thoughts on that? Like our scenario, or maybe another parent scenario that has a similar approach, versus as many sports as possible when dealing with a neurodivergent kid that really is liking that one the most.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it sounds like you guys have done a really good job at kind of, helping identify his strengths and where they sit in the sport realm. So, finding that match, like being really important. So it sounds like you've done such a wonderful job there. And I imagine probably some trial and error and finding out what works really well for him. And I know that can be challenging, especially if we might sit in a space where, perhaps we have this one specific interest and I don't want to really go outside of that, or like, this is the sport I like, this is what I like to do. And to be honest, probably when I was around that age, if somebody asked me if I wanted to do another sport, I would have said no, as much as my parents tried. And so it's kind of like, I think like fostering the strength and the autonomy as well. So like, I think it's really important that you're, allowing him to also make that decision of, okay, this is what I like to do and this is what I want to do. But he knows that there's other possibilities if that is the case. So if there's something that's not feeling quite right, or if I do have this curiosity at like trying something different, then I know that that's safe for me to like have that conversation with you, and that you'll encourage and endorse that. And I think that being really important as well. And I think, the wonderful thing about sport too is that there's so many things that we can do, I guess, that are that can support it, that aren't necessarily let's say another sport. So let's say it's like strength and conditioning, right? Those being really impactful to whatever sport that you're doing, but can be a really nice way to like learn new movements, learn about your body, get connected, feel strong, build confidence. and still something that's going to be, it's obviously, it's going to contribute to benefit that sport, but it's also going to be something a little bit outside of that. So you can have a little bit of, separation, or I would say just looking at the space of, okay, do we have any like flexibility or movement? And where is it? And how can we encourage that?
Sure.
But I think that, yeah, I can understand that there definitely can be challenge around, yeah, whether it's like keen interest or hyperfixation, if you will, around certain spaces.
Yeah, and with him, and I don't know if this is because of his neurodivergence. You would know better than I, but it seems sometimes as if he knows what he's successful at,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's when you introduce something new or try to, casually nudge him to try something new, and it's met with a no or pushback.
Mm.
Is it because he is afraid? I don't know if afraid is the right word, but is it because he doesn't want to try something where he doesn't know if he's going to fail because he's could potentially not be that good at it?
Mm.
Um, and that's like how, as a parent, it's a tough thing to deal with and navigate through, because listen, I'm with you. I would love him to try as many different activities and sports as possible. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, as his dad, I just want him to be happy.
Yeah.
And if this one activity is literally bringing him friends coming to our door, knocking for him to come out and play, so a smile to his
Yeah.
face, making him feel good about what he accomplished during that game or that practice, it's hard for me and my wife to then say, hey, we're going to stop doing this for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
try this, which we don't even know if
Mm-hmm.
you might not even be that good at. And
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes him becoming hard on himself, him getting frustrated, him having trouble
Yeah.
controlling his emotions. So have you dealt with anybody who's kind of had that experience before, or is it just encouragement to try to, hey, just try as many things as you can, and I'm sure one will eventually stick?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I've seen before, and it's again that space of like, uh, I guess exploring where, and if there is any of that flexibility, like I said, even if something it's like almost like adjacent to the sport, that we're like, oh, this could be helpful, but something,
Yeah.
um, it could be on the still a little bit different from maybe doing that activity day to day. Um, I think also what you're saying, yeah, is it, from what I'm understanding, is like we're also not wanting to like, lead to him feeling like worse, or like you said, maybe even feeling a bit dysregulated if like we're trying something that we don't feel quite good at. I think that's very fair, and I think supporting him with, like, again, how you are, you're really focusing in on like what are his strengths, what he enjoys, and is he comfortable, I guess, having like, I guess, having that conversation, if you were talking about, trying a different sport and saying, and he's like, no, I don't want to try that. And you're having these worries like, oh, is it because we're worried we might not be good at it or whatever that is? Like, is that a conversation like he feels comfortable having with you and that you can chat about to him and kind of understand maybe, yeah, like where he's coming from or how he's feeling? And if fair enough, he might just be like, that looks boring. I don't, I don't want to do
Yeah.
that. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, and just knowing that, I think it comes back to, I guess, his autonomy too. As long as he knows he's got some choice and autonomy and that decision making is going to be really important. But also that, like, from like the parent side of things, that the pressure to do whatever sport they're doing is kind of, I want to use the word under control. That's not the right word I'm thinking of, but that pressure isn't there, right? So like with that young person probably already putting a lot of pressure on themselves, like, do they know that if, they did want, like I said, taking a break, if they wanted to do that, do they have the opportunity to talk to you and say, look, I really want a break right now, or
Yeah.
this thing is really bothering me, or I want to kind of work on this? Do they feel comfortable and safe kind of like coming and having that conversation with their parents?
Yeah. Well, I hope in our scenario he does as he gets older, because I'm certainly open and receptive to it. I like what
Yeah.
you're saying too, and it makes total sense about having, there's maybe the sport that you're doing, but there's the concurrent activities away from that actual practice in that game, but there's somewhat of a connection still to that sport. For example, I think of, um, you know, a lot of athletes here, right? If they're playing football, for example, maybe they're doing like track and field as well, in their
Mm.
off season. So it's helping their speed and their agility and skill sets that they need for the actual season, but it's away from that type of environment, and it's good for them to kind of separate them, but keep some similar exercises and routines going.
Yeah. Yeah, particularly if they're really struggling to step away from there's
Yep.
like maybe one track mind on a sport,
Yep.
that might be a helpful link for them to be able to
For
like
sure.
step outside of that and add a little bit of flexibility if that's available.
For sure. So let me ask you this. So why do you believe that neurodivergent athletes experience pressure differently? If
That's
differently is the right way to
yeah.
say
No,
it.
that's very fair. I think there's a few reasons, but I think in my mind, one of the things is that, as like a person, we could use like, for example, I'm so with ADHD. And when I think about that, I think about the fact that a young person with ADHD, usually receives up to, it's like 20,000, pieces of negative and corrective, feedback before the age of 12. And so I guess when you think about how that might contribute to someone's maybe self-talk, maybe how they see themselves, their self-worth, that there can be this pressure to kind of like to fit into what the expectations of you are when maybe your mind or the way you kind of function at work doesn't fit into that neurotypical space. So I feel like there's already this kind of probably like societal pressure that's sitting there. And when we kind of tackle that onto sport, it almost kind of amplifies it, right? We have a space where, okay, if I do the thing right and well, I get positive feedback about it, whether that's through scores or placings or feedback from my coach. And then if I don't do as well as I hoped or how I'd planned, well, now I need to kind of really focus in on all the things that I did wrong and make them perfect for next time, so that doesn't happen again. So I guess it's kind of a space where if we have that kind of negative inner monologue or like self-criticism that's already quite strong, I think there's sometimes we can see it kind of being amplified in this setting.
Yeah. I feel, and again, I'm going to kind of keep referring back to our experiences through
Yeah.
this discussion. But what we have found with our son is, and you're exactly right. And I've the amount of negative feedback or negative communication or dialogue that has been spoken to him, or it could be from an adult, from a kid in his class, a teammate, a teacher. The amount of negativity that has been around him from let's say early years of school to now is incredible. It's incredible, and it's actually heartbreaking. But us as the parent and any coach who's listening to this too, it's all about the positive praise. But again, it's not about, hey, you did great, you scored 3 goals or whatever. It's finding something that could be small to point out and to recognize and to give that positive feedback for, I think goes a long way. What we've done is literally have put a chart next to his bedroom, or next to his
Mhm.
bed, I'm sorry. And every night before he goes to bed, he is literally writing one sentence of a trait that he likes about himself, to
Wow.
make sure that one of the last discussions that we had before he goes to bed is a positive one, right? It's recognizing him for this amazing quality that he has, whatever it may be that night. But him having the ability to think and write it on paper,
Mhm.
when is huge, because maybe something happened at school earlier that day, or he got in trouble for, or somebody, something happened, or somebody bullied him, or there was something negative. Be able to turn his thinking, in at some point into more positive, is really what we're trying to do right now, because
Mhm.
he is very hard on himself. He
Mhm.
does have like I feel like he has like more of a pessimistic type of mindset.
Mhm.
Um, and it's have you, like, like in you, like you, right? You know, your neurodivergence and kind of some of the things that you've experienced growing up to as a kid to where you are now, are some of these the things I'm saying resonating?
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes like, uh, there's sometimes this space of even just a internalized kind of shame for maybe the things that why can't I do this thing like this? Why is this so hard for me to do or complete this task or get this idea? Or, you know, um, when it's like, so it seems so easy for this other person. And not that it's, we, probably don't go out in the world like hoping to compare ourselves to other people. But when we notice ourselves maybe like struggling with something that seems really easy to the person next to us, it can really, yeah, lead into that space of, shame or self-criticism. And like you said, if there's other people in your life that have probably criticized you for those things as well, then it's kind of like, it would make sense that internal monologue kind of just builds and we're giving it more evidence to build upon.
And what about for like the parents and coaches? Like, what are some things that they
Yeah.
could do? So minus, what I just said that we do, right? What are some things that
Yeah.
they could do, or maybe even coaches did for you, parents did for you, that
Yeah.
were helpful?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few things. I think one of the things that's been the most helpful is and is usually most helpful for a lot of families and young people is learning about how their brain works. Because if we have a better understanding of how it works, then we're able to kind of show a little bit more understanding. Like, oh, my brain just works this way. I just need to figure out a different way versus I'm doing it wrong. And I think when it comes to uh, parents and it sounds like actually the thing that you were doing is really helping your young person identify their strengths is so incredibly important. And it sounds like really normalizing their experience and offering understanding, because I think that also is going to support that shift, right? Like to be able to, sometimes we see some young people that like maybe they haven't been able to identify a strength that they have in themselves because they actually, no one's ever asked them, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that, that is so important. And usually our young neurodivergent people tend to need more emphasis on strengths and help, if it's, whether it's focusing on or like identifying them because of, that the opposition of the negative feedback we might receive. When it comes to in a sports setting, what can be very helpful, I think, is really considering like focusing on sport related to the strengths that they have or what their interests are, but also like choice of coach. So like I think that can be really impactful in a young person. When it comes to a coach that you're looking at a team, you want to sign your kid to try out for or sign up for a team or a sport. As a parent, it can be really important to like, can you sit down and have a meeting with that coach? If you identify maybe your child being neurodivergent and having specific needs or challenges, how do they respond to that? I think that's like probably a
Mhm.
really big piece of how do they kind of take that information? Are they curious and willing to understand and ask questions? I think one of the biggest things I notice is like if we look at like ADHD, for example, do they believe in it? Because we still have many people in this world that like don't believe it to be a real
Yep. Yep.
neurodevelopmental
Yep.
disorder. So I think those things can be really important. And then also like if you sit down and watch a practice that coach runs, how do they talk to the young people? How do they talk to all of their athletes? Um, are they helping to encourage, or are they being quite critical? And we say like 9-year-olds, for example, like your son, is their coach being quite critical and harsh on 9-year-olds when they're training and practicing? That would probably be really telling of how they're going to
Yeah.
communicate with your child.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
I
I
think
think,
I think I think the coaches that
yeah,
I have run into that are the least beneficial to my son are the ones that care more about winning and losing, and making their team be the best, right? Drafting the best players, or which the fact that there's even a
yeah,
quote unquote draft for a 9 and 10 year old leagues is funny to me. But
yeah,
it's those coaches that I don't think get it. And listen, it's not, in my opinion, it's not their fault. There's
mhm,
not enough resources that exist today, or enough push from, the league leaders to communicate that, hey, we're gonna hire volunteer coaches that
Yeah.
do understand ADHD and do understand how to better communicate with neurodivergent, kids on their teams, because they're going to have a group of neurodivergent kids on their team, regardless of if they're
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed or not. And I think
Yeah.
you make a great point about the perception of what, let's just say, ADHD is, for example. It comes across visually to a coach that doesn't know you or my son as maybe they're going to be trouble. They're going to not going to keep their hands to themselves. They're going to struggle with their impulse control. They're going to cry a lot. They're going to make mistakes and not listen. They're not going to be coachable because they're not going to look at me, they're not going to, like, I'm going to be trying
Mm.
to talk to them, but are they actually listening? Those are all negatives. And I think there's too much where that's the perception and it's not. But what about all of these amazing things that this kid has that they are going to be able to do on this field that these other kids who are neurotypical aren't going to be able to do? And it's
Yeah.
like we talk negative before the positive. And if there was that change, I think that these youth organizations and probably even high schools and beyond would, those coaching staffs and those organizations would be better off. And I'm sure the parents that sign their kids up and pay money to sign their kids up for these sports would feel a lot better,
Mm-hmm.
because not every mother, not every father is able to coach their kid's team. They eventually,
Yeah.
they're going to have another, adult do that. And you want to feel like your child is obviously in the right hands with the right type of a coach that has that understanding. So I couldn't agree
Definitely.
more there. Um,
Definitely.
yeah. Now let me ask you this. So neurodivergent athletes, emotional regulation, you
Mm.
know, the one of the pieces that I've seen, whether it be again in our own family or elsewhere, is those tend to be the athletes that are typically more emotional when things don't go their way, or they lose, or they fail, or they get beat.
Mm.
You know, why is that? Because I don't fully understand it as a parent. And what can, a parent or a coach do to help their child better deal with that emotion when
Mm.
things don't go right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's probably, like a few things there. I think, uh, one of the things being when you consider somebody with ADHD, the emotional dysregulation piece that comes with that is that really like, um, the strong intensity we can feel emotions. So they might feel in that moment, they might feel so deep, so heavy. Um, and therefore it can become so overwhelming, right? And probably, and again, quite difficult to navigate when they're coming up. Um, and can be quite difficult to shift that focus when it's like this feeling is like, is weighing me down, and that's kind of all my brain is maybe spinning on or focusing on. And or if we consider even young folks with like autism, who as well might have like some rumination, right? They might really kind of circle in on spiral on those thoughts. um and a lot of it can be when we're so intensely interested in focus on a let's say a sport or an outcome, then it doesn't, if it does not kind of come out to what our expectations are, well, man, now I've that self-critic that I've been, dealing with through all of this is now coming up, and I'm just giving it more evidence. So it's right. And it's right. I am, whatever those negative thoughts are that I kind of, have been impacting me through this training cycle or ongoing, maybe through someone's life. Um, I think the other thing too is like, we again, when we look at that, self-criticism piece, there's also that external criticism piece. And then it's like, okay, I've also been criticized by people for however many things throughout my life. Now here's that reason for them to continue doing that. Like I've
Mhm.
let them down. Or and I think that's like what the, really important things of any like young person, and pretty much anybody that's involved in sport, is how important like prioritizing fun in training and sport is. Because when we are getting so, focused and in on an outcome, then that's all we're kind of working towards. we actually forget like the in between and how like fun is supposed to be such a big part of that. And I can understand with the, we can be hyper focused on things too. So that's sometimes can be challenging to navigate, but prioritizing that as a part of, why is somebody doing that sport? Why are they, what is the reason that they do that? Do they enjoy it? Do they like how it makes them feel? And knowing that they have things maybe outside of their life, outside of their sport, that are also going to be enjoyable,
Mhm.
and give them, meaning and purpose, and enjoyment can be so important we want that like preventative measure there, I think, in the first instance.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like there's always this fine line between the athletes that struggle with the emotional regulation and automatically labeling them as they are unable to have any perseverance or show any forms of grit. And
Mm,
but then if you take a step back and the coach actually is able to say, okay, well, this is our neurodivergent athlete, they actually have to persevere every day to overcome challenges that they face in everyday life. And I think
mm,
it's so. But having said all that, I still think that there's this very much this attitude of being hard on yourself. And
mhm,
I'm gonna give an example here. I'm gonna be open on this episode. So we had a situation actually 3 days ago on Saturday here, where our 9-year-old was playing in his flag football championship. They had their semifinal game followed by the championship game, so they had to win their playoff game, or I'm sorry, they had to win their first game then to make it to the championship. So my son was super excited for it. Knows, it knows that they could win the championship on Saturday night. And the first thing that didn't go his way in the semifinal game, he became angry, like slammed the ground down, cried, and had to
mm,
come out of the game. And as his parents, and my wife and I are sitting there, and we're just like, oh, here we go. What do we? Because I'm not a coach of this team, so I'm on the other sideline thinking,
mhm,
okay, what do we do here? How's this going to go? And our hope, right, is that all of this work that we've done, all of this, these exercises that we've tried, therapy with him, and all this stuff, this is going to be a moment where he's able to get over that hurdle, and this is going to be the moment where he's able to overcome the adversity, get himself back in the game, show how tough and how he can persevere. But unfortunately, it didn't go that way. He eventually came back
mhm,
into the game, and then about 5 plays later, he fell on his hand the wrong way, and then there was some physical pain there, right? So
mm,
the first instance was mental frustration because a kid caught a touchdown pass over his head. And then 5 plays later, it's now there's physical pain, and again, tears, strong emotions off the field, and doesn't come back in the game.
mm,
So now it's frustrating for us as parents because again, we think we've gotten
yeah,
to a point where where we've gotten past this, but he is totally shut down. So that
mhm,
is playoff game one. Ironically, his team wins that game. So now they're playing in the championship an hour later. So we had some conversation with him, after the game ended, and we tried to be encouraging, right? But I would be lying to you if I said that we weren't also frustrated as parents.
mm,
And, and so he then goes off with his team for, a half hour, and then they come back and they're going to their championship game. And he, to his credit, is able to start the game on the field and is playing. Now, what happens in that game, about 5 plays into that game, is he gets hit again and he actually runs
mm,
into a kid and they bump heads. So,
mhm,
that was a little bit more serious where we had to, he came out of the game, he was crying and kind of had to get checked on him because it was a head, a head type of contact.
yeah,
But he was fine. And now while all this is happening, Emma, his team is starting to lose. They're losing
mm,
by a lot. Like they're losing by like 4 or 5 touchdowns. And so now he's feeling better, but he's crying and can't get himself physically back in the game, because it's two things. One, his team's losing. It's another thing where he feels like he's now letting them down. And the third thing is, again, it's just his inability to persevere through that time. So anyway, I know I just said a lot, but in that experience, I'm sure you've had patients or families that you've worked with that may have had similar types of, not that experience exactly, obviously, but maybe something like that. If you could take that away and play, put on the hat of like, hey, we're having a therapy session here. In that scenario, with me being very open, what would your feedback be to me as the parent, and what can I better do for him? Because this is gonna happen again. I can guarantee it. So what can I do better next time?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I know that it is quite vulnerable to share our personal stories out here. But I think most often, first, I often have more questions, but my
Feel free to ask.
my one thing would be that it sounds like it sounds really important that you were able, again, he was like comfortable to have it, like, to talk to you about this, and
Well,
he was able, and you kind of understood a little bit about what was going on in his mind and being upset.
yeah, understood what was going on in his mind, but I wouldn't sit here and say that he was very much able or willing and able to talk to us. I think it was more
Yeah.
so he shut down, and it was now
Yeah.
becoming like anger. But like, was he anger at
Mm,
himself? Was he
mm,
angry at us? Was he angry at the other team? Like, and so because of that, he sort of
yeah.
mentally just shut down, where he was not able to actually communicate at the
Okay.
level that would have been, I guess, needed.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I know we can see that sometimes, yeah, we might be like, oh, we're hoping that this would be a space where we might persevere through this instance. Um, but I think it's important probably to acknowledge too. I can imagine you guys have been through so much to navigate, even being able to play in this team sport and get to this point. And I think that it's really important that we know that, yeah, there's going to be times and moments where we might have things, things aren't, I'm sure you're right. Like, we're never perfectly linear, I guess, in how we learned new strategies or the ability to regulate. But the other thing I would kind of wonder is like, what what has it been like in times and spaces like going into that game? So I guess going into that the over the weekend, like leading up to the game, like what were things like? And was it a different situation than he's normally used to playing in, whether it's like that pressure or whether it's a different environment? And were there any kind of like sensory related stressors were impactful in that moment as well? Uh, Knowing that can really lead us to that space of that, even shutdown state, depending on how somebody experiences those. Um, yeah, do you think that that there would have been any impact from those kind of things in this setting?
So, I think as far from a sensory perspective, it was just, him knowing that this is the biggest games, right? These are the big games. These are the championship games. This is where you get the trophy if you win.
Mhm.
Playing teams that are good, right? Because there's some teams in his league that aren't good, and he seems to do, well, and is happy and having fun against the teams that they're beating by, 30 points. But when it gets tough and it's close and it's good games and good players in the other team, that's when, I think as somebody who's coached at a high level and played high level, sports, that's when you hope that you see that light switch sort of, that light bulb kind of go off, and they're able to get through that, because those are the athletes, in the long run, eventually, I think that make it versus the ones that don't. But
Mhm.
and I feel like what I just said comes across as, just I could naturally be putting pressure on him myself. I try not to do that, though. I try to only, speak positively to him. Days of games, we keep it quiet during the car rides, because I
Mm,
think those are times where, you can alter somebody's mood, whether it be before the game or after the game. So we try to keep it quiet then. But my mind actually, Emma, goes to, was there any burnout leading up to it? Um, you know, because of all the things that we said, a half hour ago, right? All the different, he's just doing this sport, but he's also doing the other stuff for it, right? Like he's doing the practices and the
Mm,
workouts and and all of that. Was he tired? Was he tired? Like, what are
mm,
some signs that maybe I could have seen throughout the course of the week, or looked for
mm,
throughout the course of the week, that maybe I would have
mm.
missed? Do you have any suggestions of things to look for?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, if we almost consider our, I guess, like, um, our capacity to, uh, I guess, like, navigate, certain scenarios when we add, like, a layer of neurodivergence on top of it, we have, some additional challenges that could kind of, come up. So, like, if we consider that dysregulation piece, like you said. So, let's say, like, going up through the week, he's had to navigate regulating through some really tough times, or like you said, even like feeling tired, or the way training's been has really been kind of having him down. Um, and he's been like pushing his capacity to like, show up and function in this setting and manage all the stimuli that's coming at him in all directions, or having to really manage and try to focus or kind of rein that in like several times throughout the week. If we kind of keep like, I want to say condensing and filling that capacity bucket if it's
Mhm.
like reached its peak. That and again, I because I don't know all the information, I don't want to assume, but I would wonder whether that like bucket was so full this weekend, and he was like, okay, now I have to really,
Yep.
turn that on or whatever that is. That it was just like, oh, I actually have
Yeah.
no capacity left to really
Yep.
regulate, um, and sometimes that could be really helpful for any athlete, but particularly like neurodivergent athletes to like, and maybe have support with whether it's pre-game pre-training routines to kind of adjust and transition into the mindset that they're needed for that space. They might need a little bit extra support, and like how do we bring our focus back when it gets kind of lost or trailed off, in maybe some different ways that maybe neurotypical people might require.
So in the moment, right? Like while this is all happening,
Yeah.
um, you know, I'm replaying in my mind, what I did as the dad, right? And
Mm,
the action that I took. And then I'm thinking about the two coaches that he has that were on the bench with him and what they did. In
uh-huh,
that scenario, like if you're the athlete, what
uh-huh,
would you need from, your coach or your parent or whomever, maybe even your teammate,
yeah.
in that scenario to get you through that, that time?
Yeah, I think what can be most helpful is like having a plan that's also been kind of practiced for those instances. So I can give myself as an example, as an athlete, um, I can get very overwhelmed in certain settings when there's a lot of, um, when there's a lot going on. I tend to get really overstimulated, quite visually overstimulated in certain settings, and weightlifting, for example, is one of those places that allows for that. So I've had to work really hard at kind of like managing my overwhelm in those scenarios, and a lot of that has come down to like I need a plan for like when I'm feeling overwhelmed, and that was something I had to work with a sports psychologist on to
Mhm.
kind of figure out what was that plan and what did that look like for me, and practice it in training when I get overwhelmed, so that when the time comes for a competition, I'm prepared and ready to navigate that. With my coach also having understanding of that plan, so that we can kind of navigate it together. And my coach kind of, I guess, also maybe noticing signs that I'm overwhelmed before maybe I do. And usually he'll start to point it out to me to be like, ah, you don't seem like you're here right now. Like, what do you need to do or what can I do? So I think that being really helpful. And a lot of that's probably some, again, practice and trial and error to see what can be supportive.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I, I know when I was playing baseball at the college level, I remember that I spent time with a sports psychologist, and she helped me develop a routine, like a pre at bat routine. Cause baseball is a
Yeah.
game where, it's a game of failure. There's, the first inning could have, you may have a result in the first inning, but then have a totally different result, or need to be prepared for a totally different result in the seventh inning. And, how do you forget about anything that happened previously and just focus on the moment.
Mm.
Easier said than done, but she helped me develop an on deck circle routine, whether
Mhm.
it was breathing exercises, stretches, certain things that I looked at and focused on, and it helped me do it. Now, I was a 20-year-old kid when I was meeting with her.
Mhm.
And my 9-year-old, or any 9-year-old or 10, whatever that I coach, it's not as, especially being neurodivergent, it's not as easy for me to get him to, hey, let's stop, let's slow down, let's hit the
Yeah.
brakes, and let's take a deep breath, because he's either angry, emotional, wants to go 100 miles an hour, or can't stop. In that
Mhm.
scenario, because I'm sure there's a
Mhm.
lot of parents that face that one. What
Yeah.
would your key piece of advice be that somebody could take
Yeah.
away there?
I would wonder, my question would be like, what helps him regulate outside of these moments? So I'm sure there's times where you have to probably support him in regulating outside of, let's say, like this most heightened state. And what would you guys normally do in that setting? Or what do you notice keeps him quite regulated?
Um, Nothing. So I think it's two different things. I think on
Mhm.
the field, when it's the heat of the game, it's not as easy to keep him regulated versus when
Mhm.
we're at home and
Mhm.
he's getting in an argument with his brother, and
Yeah.
he's not keeping his hands to himself, and then he gets worked up. So we can slow the pace down at home because it's a controlled
Yeah.
environment. But when we're not on the sideline, we're the parent watching across the field, and we can see
Yeah.
he's either about to have a meltdown, or he's having one. In
Mhm.
that scenario, it's like, I mean, what do? You like hold up a sign, or give him like a thumbs up, or like give him a cue
Yeah.
so that he's able to, I don't know, maybe stop and take a deep breath. One of the things
Yeah.
I've tried, and this is something that I actually talked to him about, is, we were playing when he was playing tackle football in the summer,
Mhm.
and he would get, I don't know, he would start crying or get emotional about something, whether he made a mistake, or whether he thought in his mind that he failed in some way, shape, or form, and he started crying. What his response would be is that, let's say the play would happen and he got hit, he would stay down almost as if like he was hurt, and he
Mm.
wasn't really hurt, he was just crying and couldn't get himself back
Mm.
up. So
Mhm.
in that scenario, obviously the game has to stop and come out and come out on the field. And this season, I actually was one of the coaches. Come
Mhm.
out on the field, make sure he's okay, get him up, walk him over to the sideline. And the cue that I would always give him is, I would say, buddy, I love watching you play. You
Mhm.
got you got 3 plays to get yourself together and get back in. Because the way my son thinks,
Mhm.
he likes numbers. So it's
Yeah.
it's like, okay, maybe if I say, all right, next play you're back in, maybe he's not ready for that because there's not like an actual number. But if I say, hey, you got 3 plays till you're back in the game,
Mhm.
that seems to work a little bit better for him.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and then he can get
Yeah.
through that. But again, if I'm not saying that to him, I don't think
Yeah.
he's able to say it to himself yet. So,
Yeah.
like, at what point in the
Definitely.
development or maturity do you think he would be able to actually do, or any kid would be able to actually give themselves a
Um,
cue to then do?
I mean, yeah, I think that that was probably hard to pin down at what point, like developmentally, they might be able to do that. But I think it
Yeah.
sounds like in this case, it sounds like you said number predictability sounds like it's
Mhm.
really important for your son, and it's I would wonder like whether having some predictability going into games, and being even that being practice going into training, could be really helpful in containing that. Because if we're having games are quite unpredictable to an extent, right? So if we have some predictability going into that game with a bit of with a routine that we do before we do a game, then it's like, and then that's going to allow us to be quite regulated going into that game. Versus if we're already up here and something happens at that game, then we're just like that lid's kind of busting off, right?
Mhm.
Um, when you mentioned at home, if like he starts kind of fighting with his brother, what would be the things that you guys do to kind of like slow things down, or in that setting?
Um, well, we would essentially, encourage him to stop, and then we'd want them to be separated, right? We'd want him to, go to the opposite end of the couch or come downstairs or whatever the case may be. But then
Yeah.
also like shift his focus to something else, right? So like if there's if he's building something with like Legos on the floor, like try to get um, his focus back to that. And by
Mm,
doing it through some sort of like positive encouragement, like, hey buddy, I love this bridge you started to build. Why don't we finish that? Or why don't you try to finish that?
mm,
And that
mm,
little like, mental, or focus shift, you know, tends to do well for him. Now, it doesn't solve all the problems, and that's not to say it's not going to happen again in 3 minutes,
yeah.
but in that particular scenario, it causes that cool down to happen.
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
so, but
mm,
as a parent, right, I want to get to the point where I I don't need to always feel like I'm coaching my kids team because I have to
yeah.
be the one there to like regulate when things escalate, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I hear you. I think that, um, yeah, it sounds like does he find like time to himself as quite regulating, or
Yes,
is that
yes,
helpful to
he does.
him?
Yes,
Yeah.
he does.
Okay.
He often does, like spending some time doing his own thing for a little bit.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause I guess my wonder would be, yeah, I hear you when you're like, okay, well, at what point do I get to transition out of that, co-regulator space on the field even? And young people, I guess what we see is like young people still require some level of co-regulation, and particularly young neurodivergent people might require that, with a bit more commonly, but it is being a very helpful tool to them. The one thing I would think about going into games, and I would practice this maybe going into training, would be again just like focusing on predictability in those sets. So, like, is there some type of plan that we can have kind of before those things, and how are we helping him transition into like from home
Mhm.
uh, to football? So, and is it like, hey, you know, uh, working out with him too, like what he feels kind of comfortable with, if he's like, you know, able to kind of identify, oh, like this thing does make me feel good before I'm going in or something like that. Is it like, do we have the same, do we start having our snack before we go to training, and same, we'd have that same snack on a game day? And then is that the point where we might start talking about, okay, what's our plan today if things kind of go maybe not how we want them to?
Yeah.
Um, do
Yeah.
we, and navigating that with like, is that something we bring the coach into as well, at a later time? And then is it like, does he need a little bit of alone time going into that before that as well? And then how are we transitioning to that, to the football, and to the actual like being on the field as well? So I guess we want time for transition. So knowing that neurodivergent people probably need a lot more time to make that transition space, and then supporting it as well, and building off the things that they enjoy.
Sure, sure, sure. No, that's we've certainly found that the predictability, literally laying out, what the day or what the week is going to be like for
Mm,
him on a Sunday night, so that he knows what to expect. Um, I've thought about actually like even some sort of checklist or reward chart
mm,
that we're not only tracking the days in which he has practices and games, but we're tracking the opportunities that he has to you know have areas of character building, like like mental growth, right? Whatever they may be, but like opportunities where he can have mental growth, and then like have times where he can focus on you know like other stuff that are not athletics related.
yeah.
But again, like I see what you're saying. He does really thrive off of that predictability and facts. He's a very facts driven kid. So
Mm,
you know
mhm.
if you're going to say something to him, it's got to be exactly what you're meaning, or
Yeah.
he's going to know that that's it's very much he's a factual based person for sure. Um,
Yeah.
so let me ask you this question. So, in kind of in closing here, right, from a practical tool
Yeah.
perspective, if a parent is trying to support a neurodivergent athlete, but they feel
Mhm.
lost, or maybe they're going through the same type of roller coaster ride that I'm going through, from
Mhm.
my perspective, and maybe you've gone through as the athlete. What,
Mhm.
like, where can a parent start? Like, where can a
Mhm.
parent start to be as proactive as they can, getting a process and support in place to ultimately lead to their child not only being a successful athlete in person, but just being happy, right? Where can they start?
Yeah, I think as the parent, what can be most helpful is like doing your research and having understanding of what your young person is kind of going through. So whatever, if it's any type of neurodiversity, having understanding of what that means, really being curious about their experience if they're comfortable sharing that with you, and then also looking at, okay, the things that we've started to develop and if we sought help from professionals, okay, now how can we implement those things in a similar manner when it comes to applying to sport? Let's say, like the example we discussed with yourself, can we bring predictability and regulation pre-game to kind of make sure we are maintaining some regulation during the game? And then also really, I think, again, like really focusing in on coaching and making sure that you're, doing some work to explore, discuss, and see whether that coach is going to be the right fit for your young person, because that person's going to be so influential in your young person's life and in their sporting life. And we want to make sure that we're offering them, people that are going to be supportive and focus on their strengths.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Emma, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. And I really hope that our listeners can take a lot away from this based upon not only my experience as the parent, but your experience as the athlete. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.